I grew up in a smaller city, but I live in Toronto now. But when I moved here, it was sort of like the heyday of when Warhammer was getting going. So yeah,
Oh,
I got
nice.
drawn into that pretty quick.
Just I'm very curious because like I've never really gotten the full story. What exactly is like the sort of like story of Warhammer?
Well, it's a game by Games Workshop, and they started out as a company that imported D&D to the UK,
Uh huh.
and then they kind of moved in. This is a short version, but they moved into making miniatures, and then they moved into making rules for their miniatures, and just really blossomed from there. And now
Yeah.
they're a massive company
I
all over
know
the
there's a
world.
whole like lore to it, and there's a whole like story and
Oh yeah,
the
yeah.
emperor and like I see like because again like I love the idea of it, but I've never like actually gotten into it. So like
It's a
I
lot.
always
Like
see on like Reddit like people like these like subreddits of like Warhammer. And
yeah,
I know they're making a movie. I think they're supposed to at least with,
yeah.
like Henry
Henry Cavill's
Cavill and
he's making a TV show apparently, and
yeah,
they have
he's a
their
big
own
guy.
TV, like a TV animation studio as well, like a
Oh
private.
really?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like a subscription thing. So they
Wow.
put out animated shorts and that kind of stuff
Oh
too.
cool.
So yeah,
Because
they're
I
getting into
think
it.
there was what was it on Netflix or something. There was like it's called the final level something like that. And they had it was like
Oh,
kind of
Secret
like
Level.
the secret level. I think they had some Warhammer stuff in there.
They did. Yeah, it was based on the Space Marine 2 video game that came out not too long ago.
Uh huh.
So it kind of tracks the main character. I think it's sort of like not really a prequel, but I think it takes place sort of before the video game. So it's
Uh
that
huh.
same guy. Yeah,
Uh
yeah.
huh. So
It was
what's the
really
difference
cool.
like Warhammer and Warhammer 40K?
Well, Warhammer. Okay, so 40K is Warhammer 40,000. That's the sci-fi one with the Space Marines and all that. And
Uh
then
huh.
Warhammer, I guess, is sort of like the catch-all term, but there's a fantasy version as well called Age of
Oh, I see.
Sigmar, which sort of used to be called Warhammer Fantasy Battles, but that game, this complicated story.
Uh
It
huh.
was stopped and then sort of picked up again. So, but basically, Warhammer is a like overall arching hobby that includes lots of different games in those sort of two spheres, I guess, like the
Got it.
sci-fi and fantasy. Yeah.
Yeah, because also like I get all my paints like for all my like 3D prints and stuff. I get it from like there's like a Warhammer shop.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
I always like see all the stuff and like all the little like sets and stuff, and it's so cool. And like
Yeah.
I love that stuff. Like when I was a kid, there was a game. It was like a D&D sort of like I don't know if you call it a spin-off, but it was Heroescape. I don't know if you remember
Mm-hmm.
that game.
Yep.
And like so I never had it, but I had a friend who had like a bunch of that. Like he had like boxes and boxes of like all the pieces.
Great
It was
game.
just so cool.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
so it was, and like I like like we were young at the time. We were like probably 10. So like he was always
Mm-hmm.
like, "Oh, it's my older brothers and it's just so complicated." So like we never actually played it.
Classic. Yeah.
But yeah, but like it was just like the miniatures and the terrain and like the whole thing was such a cool concept, and like I
Yeah.
love that stuff and like
A lot
I
of
love
people will
toys.
just Yeah, well, a lot of people just paint the models and don't really play the game too. Like, there's
Yeah.
a whole thing about people who just paint, and there's like painting competitions and all kinds of stuff all over
Yeah.
the world. So,
I've seen this one guy on Instagram. He does he paints like miniatures, and I don't know if he makes it himself or if he gets them offline, but he does like Pokemon miniatures. It's like it'll be
Okay.
like Pokemon, but like in kind of the Warhammer miniature style.
oh, really?
And they're like kind of like semi-realistic and really cool. Yeah,
Love
like
it.
I love to watch. Like my feed is full of people like painting miniatures.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's really cool. So how'd you get into like making a career out of it? Because that's kind of cool. Like if you've been playing your whole
Well,
life, to
yeah. Well, I mean, I actually only started in this world in my mid 40s. So I'm 50. I'll be 52 next week. And
happy birthday.
well, thank you. I spent most of my life as a designer doing, like web and digital stuff, like
Okay,
a traditional
like
web
graphic
designer.
design.
Yeah, I kind of started out in the dot-com boom days. And then,
Okay.
that was my career for a long time. I was like a creative director and all that kind of stuff. But I had an opportunity. Well, I saw the job that I'm in now at Happy Worker come up just one day randomly, and I applied for it just on a whim. And it was a long process, but I got in there. But
Wow.
I've been doing this hobby stuff all my life, so I had a lot of background, I guess, sort of in a adjacent, world. I actually worked for Games Workshop for a little while too when I was, younger. I think in my late 20s or early 30s. So yeah, I kind of came to it pretty late in life,
Uh-huh.
I guess. Yeah.
So what was your portfolio like that got you from web design into miniatures
Well,
and toy
I
design?
had done a lot of painting of models. A friend of mine and myself had like a very small little sort of like side business making figures kits, like historical figure kits based on Canadian soldiers and that kind of thing. So I was aware of the process of making models and collectibles. I kind of, I knew enough, about how it worked, and had, made stuff and sold stuff. And when I worked at Games Workshop, I had some insight into their process as well. So because I had, some opportunities to go over to the UK to visit their head office and see their, facilities and that kind of stuff. So yeah, honestly, it was really just like hobby experience. And
Wow.
yeah,
That's cool that you were able to turn that hobby into a job. Like,
yeah, I mean,
that's fun.
honestly, I was extremely lucky. It just came at a good time.
Yeah.
I didn't study to be in this, and I don't even know how. To be honest, don't even really know how someone would, start out in this career if they were starting from scratch. So I'm maybe not the best use case for begin as a collectible sculptor or anything like that. But yeah, it was a lot of luck. So very thankful for that.
Did you have any exposure to sculpting before? Like, were you doing any kind of, even like on a hobby level, were you doing any sculpting, or that only came once you got the job?
Yeah, a bit. So I had done a little bit of 3D modeling, well, maybe in like the late 90s when I think I was using Lightwave at the time. I was doing some really minor stuff. I worked on like a couple like commercials and things, doing some really basic things, but
like VFX mostly.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, so I did that, and really just I did a little bit of traditional sculpting as well, but just on a hobby level too. So I really didn't start using ZBrush until I started working there. I made a choice to sit down and actually learn it.
Yeah. Oh, wow, that's really cool. It was
it took me a couple tries, but I made it. ZBrush was not easy for me to jump into.
For sure.
I mean,
it's not easy. It's not easy to learn, like, even if you're doing it for a while. So especially like if you're kind of going from from very little experience to almost zero experience to like jump in and start making miniatures. That's
it didn't work the way I thought it would, and it's the UI is intimidating. Let's,
for sure.
be real about that, and people say that all the time, and I agree with them. But once I know there's a point where if you just persist, it kind of clicks, right?
Yeah.
And once you kind of get over that point, I think it's a lot more natural for sure.
So were you like self-taught, or did somebody at the company teach you and kind of train you in the the methods of sculpting?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I was self-directed. I did a lot of courses, a lot of YouTube videos, all that kind of stuff. But I didn't take any like formal training, I guess.
Wow. So, but you only did all that training once you were hired by the company you were working for.
Well, because we were getting models, and they would say, "Hey, can you take a look at this? Could you load this in the ZBrush and see if it's the right size or something like that?" And I'll be sure. And then I'd load it up. I'm like, "Wow, how do I even do this?" So there's a lot of that. And then it was something I was interested in anyway. So I just dove in and put in that time. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. That's definitely an unconventional way of
it's probably the hard way. I wouldn't recommend it, but
wow.
It works.
Yeah. Listen, clearly it's working, so you did something right.
It worked out.
So what kind of stuff are you working on mostly? So you're making miniatures, and you said collectibles. So what sort of collectibles? So like small scale, large scale?
A little bit of everything, honestly. So at Happy Worker, we make collectibles for a lot of video game companies. So
Nice.
there's like a lot of statues, vinyls. We even do plush toys and stuff. There's no sculpting in that, but our company is very small. There's only, how many of us are there? 5, I think.
Oh wow.
And so I wear a lot of hats there. There's a lot of design tasks that I take care of, and I'm not always sculpting everything either. So I rely on freelancers and other people to help out sometimes
what kind
too.
of
But
what kind of games is like, which you said video games? Which ones? I don't know if you can disclose that, but
I can do some. I worked on the Baldur's Gate 3 Collector's Edition.
Oh, cool.
So that was probably the biggest recent one.
Yeah.
I didn't sculpt it, but I did some sculpting on it, and a lot of packaging design, and there's a lot of stuff in there, like other knickknacks and things that I worked on.
Mm-hmm.
And we do a lot of stuff for Warframe as well. Like, so we make collectible statues for them and all kinds of stuff for their events and that kind of thing.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, we do stuff for musicians and then some sort of like what would you call it, like marketing type stuff, like little giveaways and things like that too. So
yeah.
So
are you doing any like 3D printing? Like, do you print your miniatures, or are you mostly doing it just like sculpting it in ZBrush and then kind of
a lot of the time? Yeah, so we have a lot of factory partners that will take care of a lot of that stuff.
Just can't hand it off.
Yeah, but it does, like, sometimes if I'm unsure about the scale of things or how things are read in, real life, I'll do a quick print just to see, what does it look like, or if these details are reading. And I find that's the hardest thing when sculpting digitally, is kind of getting a sense of how big things are and whether they'll like translate in real life, like the detail will pop out and all that kind of stuff. So I do like to print once in a while, but not always. Sometimes we'll send it off to a factory and ask them to kind of do their thing, and then they'll send us samples for us to look at.
Oh, nice. What kind of printer are you using? Like when you do your own personally?
I have a Frozen Sonic 8K.
Oh, nice.
Mini. Yeah.
Nice.
So it's pretty good. I actually was printing some stuff this morning and almost never have any trouble with it. So I'm really happy with that one. I've had it for a couple of years now, I think.
Oh, nice. Do you do any FDM printing, or it's mostly resin?
A little bit. Sometimes I'll do FDM for hobby stuff, but actually I have used it for really quick sizing tests for collectibles too. If I just really
just like for scale.
something fast for scale, but not for detail or anything like that. But it is good if you just need to check something quick. I mean, it takes a long time, but you don't have to worry about all the the cleanup and all that stuff.
Yeah, like I got when I was first getting into 3D printing, I went with FDM just because just for the sake of the cleanliness aspect of it, like not having to deal with like all the chemicals and everything.
Yeah.
It is great, but yeah, you definitely don't get the same level of detail obviously as you get with like a resin printer. Yeah. And like it's fine, especially because like most of my things are like on a bit of a larger scale. Like, I'm not doing like miniatures so much. Right. I definitely want to get into like the resin printing because it just looks so much better.
It does. If you have the space to kind of be a little bit messy, it does make it a lot easier. So I have all my stuff in my basement, and I don't have to worry about being too clean. You know what
exactly.
I mean?
Yeah. So we talk about your early career. So you started off in the web design, you said. So did you go to school for what was kind of your background that got you into web design?
Well, it's kind of almost the same story. So when I was in school, the internet was like, pretty new. I was in school in the early 90s, and I was doing, I think the program was called New Media. So it was a lot of audio, video, that kind of stuff. And I went to the Ontario College of Art and Design here in Toronto. Nice. So I was doing sort of like technology type artwork, I guess. And I thought I was going to go into doing, like movies and that kind of stuff. But I discovered I really didn't like that world.
Yeah.
I didn't like being on set, and I didn't like being on set for so many hours. It just kind of rubbed me the wrong way.
What kind of thing did you want to do? Like directing, that kind of thing, or cinematography?
I think so. Yeah. I think it sort of goes back to like, I was really into toys when I was a kid, and to me, it's like a lot of storytelling and world building, and I was really into that kind of thing. So I thought, making movies would be good. And I dabbled in it a little bit, and then when I graduated, everybody was hiring. Like literally everybody could. If you knew how to use Photoshop, like you could get a job pretty much anywhere. Yeah. Because it was right in the boom, and they were just hiring like crazy. So I got a job at a good company, and I was there for about 5 years, and I learned, on the job. And I had known, like I was tinkering with HTML and all that kind of stuff. Like nothing like it is now. Like this is the most bare bones type stuff back then. But, I learned as I went, and kind of the same thing. I just sort of fell into this thing based on some experience that I had just doing my own personal stuff.
You got lucky a few times in your career.
It seems like that's the way it's worked for me the whole time. I started out doing, just really basic web updates and, like graphics and updating web pages. And then that got into, getting more experience and becoming more of a, like a manager and a creative director and that kind of stuff. I had my own company with a couple of people for a while doing, consulting and building web apps for people and that kind of stuff. And yeah, I did that for, a good chunk of my life, and some freelancing along the way, same kind of
Yeah.
work as well. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah.
And so then, at what point did you decide like that you wanted to move into the world of like toys and collectibles? How'd that kind
Well,
of decision? What
it
was that
wasn't really
process?
a conscious decision, I guess, because I was freelancing at the time. I saw the job posting.
Mm-hmm.
I think I was freelancing at that time, and I just applied on a whim because I felt like I could do it. I saw the requirements and everything, right? And
Yeah.
I thought, oh, I know how to, do this stuff. And I think also when I was hired, the job wasn't for a sculptor or anything like that. It was
Uh-huh.
more for graphic design type stuff. So I
Okay.
knew how to do all that stuff, and I was comfortable in the world. So I was like, oh, I can apply for this, and I
Yeah.
did, and and I got in there. So all that other stuff I kind of added on after I
Mm-hmm.
started working there. Yeah,
Yeah. That's really cool. And you enjoy the what you do now. I
I
assume
do. I love it.
more than
Yeah,
the
I
web
always
design.
wonder if like if with how it would feel if I had started this as a younger person. Like if I decided oh, I'm going to go into making toys when I was in my 20s, and then
Yeah.
did whatever you need to do to study for that. And would I feel burnt out now, or
Right.
would I have changed my mind?
Right.
It's kind of nice to have the the freedom to change your career path when you're
Yeah.
older,
Yeah.
on your own terms. So yeah,
Yeah.
very, I mean, I understand I'm very fortunate, and it's not really the way things go for most people, but
Right.
yeah, it was just an opportunity I had to like jump on, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. It's
Yeah.
amazing that like also the timing is pretty great because like the whole world of collectibles has really exploded over the last what is it 5 years? That and they've been around for a long time, but in the
Yeah.
last few years, the whole kind of I saw statistics somewhere that was it in 2023 or 2024 was the first time that adults 18 and over surpassed children in buying toys.
Really.
So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
I would
'cause
totally believe that for sure.
yeah, I mean the market's huge now, and like it's very popular. I mean, like I love to collect toys. I'm a toy designer, and that's like my passion and my my
Yeah.
a big hobby, I guess you call it. And so I definitely like I get it, but just for you, like it's great timing to be in the industry, and to be in the market.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of nostalgia for people that are maybe more my age, or maybe they're
Yeah,
younger even. I know if you look at stuff like, like I like making action figures. It's like really the thing I like the most. And
yeah,
I have a lot of like nostalgia for the old Star Wars figures and GI Joe.
yeah.
Collect like the old LJN Advanced Dungeons and Dragons figures from the 80s. Like it was a
Uh-huh.
small range from back then. So I think a lot of people still love that stuff when you look at like Super
Yeah,
7 and what they're doing. And
yeah,
yeah, I mean, it's bonkers the amount of stuff that they make.
yeah, yeah. No, there's definitely a nostalgia aspect, and then I think also just like I don't know what else it is, because I think just a lot of collectibles are just appealing, like what was being put out nowadays. Like you look at, for example, like Funko. Like I have a lot of Funko Pops. They're
Yeah.
just visually appealing, and if you kind of like a company like that, that's just a good example because they have licenses with pretty much every IP
For
that
everything.
exists.
Yeah.
So if
I
you're
think
a
that's
fan of
part of it.
anything,
Yeah.
yeah, you're a fan of anything, and and it's a visually appealing, and they package it really nicely, and so you
Right.
could display, so it kind of I don't know what it does, but it kind of like scratches a certain itch, of like
Yeah.
kind of being surrounded by things that you love, like
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, and then especially also I love the I don't know, like, and there are a lot of there are a lot of companies out there that do it, but like the kind of larger scale collectibles that are kind of high detail, like for example, like the sideshows,
Like a
that are out
sideshow.
there,
Yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
like they also they just look really cool too. Like to have that
Yeah.
on your shelf or have that in a display case, like it looks really awesome. It's like it's fun to look at. It's like for me, I
Yeah.
have like around my workstation, I just have like all different toys and collectibles because it kind of inspires me and makes me just
Yeah.
it's that alone is kind of a reason to buy it.
Exactly. Yeah, they're a crazy amount of work to make. I mean, I haven't done anything quite the same level as Sideshow, but we've done some statues, and yeah, it's a
Yeah.
lot of work goes into those. They look
Yeah,
great
yeah.
when they come out. Yeah,
Yeah, I know sideshows are amazing. Their stuff is just
it's
like
crazy.
out of
Yeah.
this world. Yeah, their stuff is.
Yeah, I love
And
watching their painting videos and just the
yeah,
process, see how they make
yeah.
stuff.
There's a couple of years ago on what was it? Was it the Zebra Summit? A few years back, where Ian Robinson went to the Sideshow Studios and like was
Right.
touring around there, and and you see these artists. It's not a big team. I mean,
No.
these people who. What I was really blown away by is like, especially for me at the time, I was still kind of early on in my journey, and I was thinking like, how do you kind of get to that point in your career, And these guys who was going around interviewing, all these guys were like in their 40s and 50s. And I kind of had this like eureka moment, like, wait a second, like these guys have like been doing this for years and years and years. Like these are the cream of the crop. You know what I'm saying? And it's kind of like a little bit comforting. It's like, okay, now I got a little time still.
You got lots of time. Yeah.
But it's awesome. Like the whole, I love, for me, like toys and collectibles, that's like my bread and butter. So,
Right.
So you're really speaking my language.
That's good. Yeah. I totally, I get that for sure.
Yeah. And also I love you have that, you had that base mesh. I used your action figure base mesh.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And I did like a G.I. Joe play. Like it was a Joe Rogan, J.R. Joe play on G.I. Joe. Yeah.
I think I may have updated it since, I'm not sure if you have the latest one.
Oh, nice.
I'll make sure you have the latest one. But I did a few tweaks to it, and I'm
Oh,
always
nice.
making changes, and I want to make one that has some more articulation in it now too.
Yeah.
So
There's somebody, I forgot who. I'll have to find it. Somebody has like an action figure articulation like kit where it's like it's like a Boolean kit that's like it's like joint articulations that you can just kind of put in. I haven't really played around with it. So I've downloaded it. I haven't really played around with it yet. But
it's I used it once. It was pretty handy, and it changed the way I thought about doing joints actually a little bit, because I think those were if it's the same one, I think it had some. They were just like planes with dynamic thickness on to control the tolerance and stuff like that. Yeah. They were really cool. I like those.
And it's interesting because like the whole. Like I've tried to do some articulation stuff, and it's not so simple. Like you look at it, and it looks simple, but when you're trying to actually engineer it, it's a lot more difficult than you think it is.
I did one vinyl that had arms that just rotated. That was it. It was really simple, and when I was sculpting it, it was really hard because it had a weird shape to the body, like it had sort of like a pear-shaped body. So sculpting the arms so that they would clear the body when they rotated, and then not looking weird at the same time, because I had to remove a lot of like material in certain places that made it look strange. Right. It was a lot of messing around trying to get that to look good. I remember. Yeah.
Do you do that all yourself, or do you usually like outsource that to somebody like an engineer or something like that? Yeah,
sometimes, but not a lot. Usually I'll get it to a good point and then hand it off to the factory, especially if it's complicated, and let them sort of deal with how they want to divide it up so they have the right space in their tools for molding, all that kind of stuff. And they're the experts, so I have done it a little bit, especially for resin stuff. It's a lot easier, but for plastic, like for vinyl and that kind of thing, I usually let them kind of figure it out.
Yeah. These things, they make it look simple, but
like it doesn't look hard, but there's a lot that goes into it, and even just like the number of parts and leaving space for glue and like all these like little things that you wouldn't really think about necessarily.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. How do you like kind of balance between your personal passion projects and your more professional work, or is it they kind of go hand in hand at this point?
That's a good question. I'm pretty good at keeping my work day and my personal day separate. So, I can't really work on personal projects, during work time and all that kind of thing. Right. But, I most of the stuff I do for myself, I like to do late at night. I find I'm most creative at, like 10 to 11 p.m. So if I am going to do stuff, I'll kind of just sit down and use that time. Yeah. What do
your personal projects look like? Is it also same kind of thing, miniatures and collectibles and action figures?
Yeah, it's funny. I'm a little bit scatterbrained when it comes to that stuff, because sometimes I'm thinking, I really want to do, more action figures. So I'll kind of go down that rabbit hole for a while, and then, I'll think of like, I really want to make some miniatures. So I'll kind of switch focus. I honestly like the thing I do love the most is action figures, probably closely followed by miniatures. But for miniatures, I usually just make stuff that I want to make for myself, like for my own games, or just things that I'm interested in.
Yeah.
Instead of making stuff that I, could sell, or
Right.
I don't design it with the intent of like making a range or selling stuff, even though I do sell the odd thing here and there, but I only have like a few. I've done some commission work for some people too, that kind of thing. Yeah.
So just out of curiosity, this is like another Warhammer question, but
yeah,
like,
shoot.
I know a lot of people, like you're just saying yourself, like a lot of people will print miniatures to like for their games. How does that work? Because like I assume there's kind of a certain range of like what's acceptable for the game. Like how do you?
That's a tricky one. Yeah. I mean, you can pretty much print whatever you want. Like there's miniatures for everything, right? On Cults 3D and Thingiverse and my Mini Factory, which is a big one.
My Mini Factory there's a huge. I forget. I don't know, there's a few designers on My Mini Factory that just have these like huge like army packs and thousands and thousands of miniatures that you could buy.
A lot of it is upgrade parts. So if you're building a Space Marine and you want a certain like shoulder pad with a certain design on it from from one of the chapters in the game, you can print out those. That's not such a big deal. Where people get into trouble is sometimes if they're doing stuff that's too close to like IP infringement, so directly copying things, and you'll see sometimes I think Games Workshop comes through and does a bit of a cease and desist, and a lot of things disappear, and then they start to fill up again. So it's a bit of a gray area.
From like a technical, like if let's say you and me were playing, and I just like pull out some piece that I made up myself, like you're like, wait a second, like who said you could do that? Like, how does that work?
Well, I mean, I guess the lore is pretty clear on what things do and what they're armed with and what they look like. So most people try to, stay in that realm, and sometimes you see some crazy stuff. But if it's just me and you playing, who cares? Like, we can do whatever you want.
I guess that's true. Yeah.
If you're going to a Games Workshop tournament or something where they're, organizing, and you can't bring any of that stuff there like that.
Right. They have to use their official like licensed products and
exactly.
Yeah.
But I think like a lot of people will just print little bits, like a cool sword or a different kind of helmet or something like that. Yeah.
Got it. So it's not like they're not making new characters up. They're just kind of enhancing what already exists.
Most of the time, yeah.
Got it.
Or their take on a certain faction or something, like it might be a themed kind of thing or something like that. Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
I've seen also now like there's other games have popped up that also kind of lean into the miniature. What's the term? What do they call war games? Right? It's the term for the
miniature war games. Yeah.
Yeah. So I know it's like a Star Wars one. Was it like Star Wars Legion, something like that?
Yeah, there's a bunch of Star Wars ones. Yeah.
Yeah, they're so cool. Like it's really.
Whatever IP you're into, there's probably, or maybe at one point there was a game for it, but right now there's a crazy amount of stuff and a lot of indie stuff too. Even some like print and play type games where everything is digital. Like all the miniatures are digital, and you're expected to print them out, and the rules are digital. And
I developed my own board game. It's not quite like a miniatures game, but it's kind of I drew some inspiration from what was that I talked about before? Heroescape. Kind of like it's like a hex base, and I did some of like the terrain stuff. And like I got it. I'd say like 80% of the way there, maybe 85% of the way there. And the only problem I had to get over the last 10, 15% was I couldn't figure out how to get the game to end. It's just like it kind of just keeps going on and on, like there is a clear objective and a clear here's the way that the game would end, but it's just whenever I've tried to play test it, it just goes on for hours and hours, and it doesn't conclude. I'm like, all right, this doesn't work.
A little more play testing required.
Yeah. So actually, it's funny because just this week, a friend of mine put me in touch with. It's like he had I think his friend's brother-in-law, something like that, is very into board games. So he has this like board game, weekend retreat he does in New Jersey. And he developed, I don't know what game it was, but he developed some sort of like expansion to a board game that exists.
Okay.
And he did a Kickstarter on it. So
nice.
So I was telling him that. So he's going to hopefully try and help me do some play testing and tweak this a bit, because if you have a game that doesn't end, it's not exactly
probably figure that part
out. But I love, again, that's one thing. I love the idea of like I was saying, like with like Warhammer and these different games, but the hard part is that it's a tremendous amount of like time and resources to really get into it. So I kind of had this idea of like I wanted it to be like a 2-player game, that anybody could sit down and learn the rules fairly quickly and like play through a game in like an hour, hour and a half. That's kind of the idea. So I'll see if it if it ever ends.
Yeah, Games Workshop does have some smaller games that are in the same worlds, but they only require a handful of models. My favorite game ever is Blood Bowl, which is I made an action figure based on one of the characters in that game.
I've seen that action figure. So what is Blood Bowl? I thought
Blood
it was
Bowl is like fantasy characters, like orcs and that kind of thing, playing a sort of rugby / football / soccer game.
Okay.
And it's the best game in the world. So you have about 11 players. Well, you have a roster up to 16, but on the pitch at one time, the maximum of 11 guys. And the cool thing about the game is you can do a league or a tournament where the players gain skills and get better over time. So you can develop like a sports team, basically. It's like managing a sports team, except with, more violence. And
it's a fantasy football in a different way.
Yeah, it's huge. Like there are thousands of people who play all over the world. There's tournaments practically every weekend.
So it's like a board game, or is it
a board game?
Is it similar to like war games where it's kind of, there's not like a set board, it's kind of like based off space? Or
this one does have a board with squares on it that you move like a, not like a chessboard, but so it has a grid on it. So the pitch, like the playing field, is the board basically.
Oh, cool. And it's 2 players. It's like a 1v1.
2 players. Yep.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's
cool.
I started playing it like 20 something years ago, and I love it. I've been pretty heavily involved with it in the past, and running tournaments and all that kind of stuff. And to this day, it's still going strong. It's not even, I think it's one of their Games Workshop's most popular games outside of the sort of like big, core ones.
Yeah. So the character you developed, what was that?
Oh, so that's Lord Borak the Despoiler, who is my favorite character. He's like what they call a star player, so he's like a known character in the game that you can hire for special occasions, so you need a little extra muscle.
So is it miniatures? It's like the...
they're miniatures just like the Warhammer ones. These days they're all plastic, multi-part plastics that you put together and paint. And they'll sell like a team in a box. And I made an action figure version of that. So when I made my base mesh, that was the that was the second thing I made. I used my base mesh to make that figure.
Oh, very cool. So you made your base mesh. Was that for your self portrait? Was that what the intention was?
When I made my self portrait, I don't know how I came up with that idea, but
it's really cool. I liked it a lot.
I made a self portrait, and that started the whole base mesh thing, and then I just decided to share it because I had it just lying around.
Yeah.
So
it's a great base mesh. I gotta say, like, it was a really great. Like, I used it for a few projects, and it's great.
That's cool.
And it's like it's what a good base mesh is. Like a good place to start. And
just to starting, like it just saves you time, right? You don't have to.
Exactly.
Do the same thing over and over. I have one for miniatures as well, for like Warhammer scale models.
Oh, nice.
That I use sometimes. It's kind of the same idea.
How does it work with, like, because I know with miniatures for, like Warhammer and whatever, in miniature games, the scaling is kind of different, because obviously, like if you do human scale, you're going to end up, pieces will be way too thin. So you kind of have to like beef up certain aspects. How's that kind of work? Like, what's the
I guess a little bit depends on your outlook on how they should appear. So the chunky sort of like beefy ones, I think they're usually called heroic scale. So the proportions are out of whack for sure. Like the head is too big and the limbs are very thick, and the hands or feet are usually too big, but they do read pretty well when they're printed out at size. I think, like with my base mesh, I think what is the normal person is like 7.5 or 8 heads tall, whereas I think the base mesh is 6 or 6.5. So it's really changed, and when you look at it up close, it looks weird. Like I actually struggle with it sometimes, because I think you tend to want to make things look how you think they should look in a real person, but if you print it out, it will be just like it just reads too small. But some people do like to sculpt on more of a true scale look, and the limbs are thinner, and it does work out sometimes.
Looks like in general, action figures, are they usually doing that? Like when you go and buy whatever, a Super 7 or a G.I. Joe, is it kind of they mess around with the scale and those as well?
I think that they're a little more realistic. They might be slightly changed, but they're closer. I think the bigger you get, the closer you can get to normal proportions. But the smaller, even like I've sculpted models in 10 millimeter, which is like a 1 centimeter tall figure for like historical games and stuff. And if you look at those up close, they look ridiculous. Like they're like deformed bodybuilders almost. They're super wide, and the heads are gigantic, and the hands are massive.
If you did it to scale, it wouldn't. It
would just be nothing. Yeah, it would just be this little piece of plastic with no detail really. Like even the I made some pikemen for a historical game once, like some ancients, and the pikes themselves look like they're holding telephone poles when you're like, zoomed in. But when you print them out, it makes a bit of sense, right?
When you're looking at them, also like I guess you're not when you're playing a board game, you're not looking at them up close. You're looking at them from you're sitting and you see it from
several feet away. Yeah,
right. So you kind of have to take that into consideration.
Yeah, exactly. And then, the other consideration is when you're doing details, like they have to pop out a lot more. So the thickness of things like belts and like sword blades, hair, all the details are carved in, much deeper than you would think they were in real life. Yeah. Even the thickness of like a sword blade on a miniature has to be, looks like a cricket bat, because it's not only does it have to look right, but it has to not break too, right? So it's like minimum sizes for all the exactly.
Yeah. Especially when you're dealing with like if you're printing yourself, you're dealing with resin where it's kind of already delicate to start with. That makes sense. What was some of like the most memorable projects or collaborations that you worked on?
Oh, that's a good one. The Baldur's Gate 3 project was good. That was a long process. We did. We worked on the statue. It was sort of like a sideshow scale type of statue. Like it was big, but it was in vinyl instead of in resin. We sculpted like a keychain and a giant metal D20, and then a bunch of like stickers and printouts and that kind of stuff.
Oh, cool.
And then I had to design the box and how that was going to work and how I package all the stuff in there so it wouldn't break and would also fit in a reasonably sized box. And then also taking into consideration even just the unboxing experience. So, like your customer gets the box and they open it and like how it reveals itself and all that kind of stuff is a lot to take in. But that was cool because...
Were you handling all that? Because I know like a lot of times companies will have like a packaging designer and they'll have, people...
So we only have a few people, so I took the lead on a lot of that kind of stuff. So the packaging design, I did a lot of work on that one. That was probably the thing I touched the most. And then I did a lot of sort of like art direction type things for the statue. So working with the person who did the paint master and making sure, that they painted it the way it was supposed to be and used the right colors. And then also working with the factory to make sure they print it the right way.
Right.
Excuse me. And also just, when they're doing all the molding and casting and stuff, they'll send you samples to look at. And you have to look, make sure the details are coming out and are there mold lines and that don't look good and pieces are fitting together properly and defects and all that kind of stuff. So there's like we all sort of are all involved in all of those things, but my personal responsibility is more in that realm. So working with the factory, packaging, paint, and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Oh, very cool. I'm really curious about like packaging design. Can you kind of walk me through what's the process of like how does it? Obviously, when you buy something, you open up. There is thought that's put into it, but I think it's something that people don't necessarily recognize. You don't think like someone's got to think of this. Like how is this?
Yeah. Usually, I like to. So first, it's good to understand how your product, I guess, is going to be broken up. So is it just the figure, or does it come with some accessories and maybe a base that's separated and I like to figure out how those are going to be laid out. So I like to, put things that make sense. Like, if you're going to have a weapon, it would be cool if it was beside the hand that it goes in, like that kind of thing, right? Yeah. The base is like under his feet and, those little things. You just want to kind of think about how it's going to be presented. And then I will actually take it into the model into ZBrush and actually lay it out how I want it, all the parts to be like where they sit in relation to each other. And from that, I can make like a bounding box and kind of figure out, okay, this is how big of a space I need to hold all this stuff. And that will help me figure out like how big the box is going to be. And also, you need to think about the if there's like a blister inside or something that holds the parts. Like you need some extra space for that, and then taking into consideration like where a window may go and that sort of thing. So once I kind of have an idea of the layout and the size of the box, then I can go and get a die line for the box design. So that's how the if you take like a cereal box and you unfold it, lay it out flat, that's the die line, right? So you have a place to place all the graphics and that kind of thing.
Got it.
Sometimes the factory will supply a die line if it's if you tell them the dimensions that you're working with. Sometimes I just make my own, and then I'll take all the assets and lay them all out, and then I go through the whole approval process with the studio to get their okay. And there's also a bunch of stuff like regulatory things, so you have to have the age in the right place. There's like choking warnings and symbols that need to be on there. It's like a lot of
all that you have to
information.
You're responsible for all that.
Yeah, we're responsible for all that stuff. So I have like a template that I have that has all the symbols on it, and I know if it's for a certain age group, I have to put the choking warning has to go in the front of the box, for example.
Right.
So I have to leave room for that and also make it look good because it's not really the nicest looking thing in the world, right? So and there's like UPC codes and all this kind of thing too. So usually what I'll do is I'll make a template, put everything sort of in the right spot. Sometimes the studio will take that template and put their own graphics on it, or sometimes they'll just send me a bunch of stuff and I'll kind of design one for them depending on their comfort level. A lot of the times, like the video game companies, they have a lot of artists, right? So they're usually pretty good at figuring that stuff out, or at least giving me artwork that I can use. So then it gets laid out and printed, folded up, and
very cool. Does the studio tell you like we need a box that's this big, or is it kind of, because is it the model is this size, so the box needs to be this size, or is it kind of we want to because I'm trying to rephrase this question. Are they doing it what's going to look the best, or are they doing what's going to be most economically sensible?
Yeah, a bit of both, honestly. And also the third thing is environmental friendliness. So we don't like to use a lot of plastic.
Right.
We're trying to get away from making blisters and things like that out of plastic just for, environmental reasons, which is not always possible.
What's the replacement?
You can do like card inserts and boxes with open windows. You might notice like a lot of companies now, like who makes the? Maybe it was NECA who was making some D&D figures, and they have like a card blister type thing, but they're closed on front. Like there was just cardboard with a picture of the model on it. So there's like that kind of stuff too. But there are alternatives and you can use pulp trays as well and things like that, right?
So a pulp tray kind of acts as a blister, but it's made out of like cardboard or
paper, like molded paper or cardboard, So there's those kind of alternatives. So there's sorry, what was the original question? I think I went on a tangent there.
No, it's fine. I was talking about the considerations that are kind of go in to making the
the sizing and stuff. So usually we will make a recommendation just because we know how it has to be laid out and what size considerations are, but you have to also take into consideration shipping, right? So you don't want to make a massive box because it takes up a lot of space, which costs a lot of money. So try to keep things economical, but also looking good and also being environmentally friendly. Those costs add up. So there's a lot of give and take sometimes too, right? So
what do you think is like the first priority? And I assume probably the economic side of it probably comes
probably. Well, maybe the look too. I mean, that's the easy part though. Usually they have good artwork already to work with, so you can always make something look cool. Whether it's got all the bells and whistles or not, that's where you run into starting. That's where you run into the costs building up. Like if you're doing, like I did a box for Melina Martinez, who's like a musician, and we made a action figure or like a collectible vinyl figure line for her, and it had like gold foil and stuff on the outside and spot UV and that kind of thing. So those little details look really cool, but they also cost extra money.
Right. But when you're dealing with that kind of client, I assume it's kind of different than it's a different calculation.
There's a lot of branding stuff to take into consideration. So for someone like her who's got a lot of image stuff and like a lot of branding things, like there's a lot to work with, so and they have an expectation of a certain look and a certain level. They'll be more sensitive to those things as opposed to like for sure. And they give a lot of feedback too.
Yeah.
So I actually like working with those kind of people because they're very clear on what they
Mm-hmm.
want. They're like, no, this has to be this way, and this has to be this color, and blah blah
So you
blah.
like that?
Whereas
It makes your job easier because then
it
it's
does
less.
honestly, like
Yeah.
we've done stuff with some movie studios and stuff too, and they're the same way. Like they're very clear on what they want. There's
Mm-hmm.
people who are doing things that maybe have not made toys before, or they're making some kind of collectible for like their business, and it's not a toy related thing or not a
Yeah.
media kind of thing. They're not expected to know what's going on. That's why they hire us, right? So
Right.
we have to take the direction or take the lead a little bit more on that stuff, which is great. It's just sometimes it just takes a little longer.
Right. For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you think your like approach to making toys and collectibles and miniatures has changed over time in your time doing it?
Well, I always feel like I don't like everything. Every time I start something new, I just feel like I'm starting over. Like there's always something new to learn. So, everything is taking into, what was the last thing I did and what would I change? How would I make the process easier? And, there's a lot of that kind of stuff going on. Like I'm working on some stuff now where, I have to do some detail stuff, which I know is going to be a point that the studio is going to want to change, but I know that it won't be easy to change. So I spent a lot of time thinking about how I'm going to do that. So I'm always looking at old projects and sort of like evaluating how can I do this easier or better or just even more editable, I guess is maybe like a good way to put it, just so I'm not locked into changes and that are hard to back out of, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're kind of trying to keep it almost modular. So kind of
yeah, that's probably a good way to think of it. Or just non-destructive is probably the best way to think about it. Yeah. So an example is I did a vinyl that had it was a stick man. It had a cape. And when I did it, I don't know how I did it. I probably made like a flat, like a rectangle and dynameshed it and sculpted on it. Now, when I do something like that, I would start with a flat plane and probably use a dynamic like shape or dynamic subdivisions, right, and ZBrush so I can adjust the thickness, because there's some points where they're like, oh, this needs to be like a certain thickness. I think I had made it too thin. The factory wanted it thicker, so when you have a big blob of a Dynamesh, it's harder to change. Whereas if you have dynamic thickness, it's 2 seconds with a slider. So it's stuff like that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Working smarter, not harder, as they say.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, for sure. That's always like, it's kind of like striking that balance of like trying to figure out what's the best way to go about whatever the project is to like
they're all different.
For sure.
Yeah,
for sure. And ZBrush is like so powerful that it allows you to do all these different things that you really can do things very non-destructively. Where as long as you put the proper foundation at the beginning, that you're able to go in, because like you're saying, if you kind of go in and Dynamesh from the start, and then you're kind of up the creek without a paddle. And
I mean, it works for some things, but not for everything. I think it's just a matter of planning what you're going to do and just taking a bit of time at the beginning just to figure out what your approach is going to be. Right.
For sure.
It's important. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So what are some projects that have like pushed you out of your comfort zone, would you say?
Well, I can't tell what it is, but I'm working on something now where it has a high level of detail, like hand sort of sculpted detail on the surface, which, like I was saying, I'm pretty sure the studio will have feedback on, which is totally cool. Like that's just the way it works.
Right.
But I'm struggling a little bit figuring out how I'm going to do it so that I'm not super locked in and that I can go back and make changes easily. It may just be one of those things that you can't get out of it, because it is a highly artistic sort of look. It's a very like hand drawn type look on it. So that one's been pretty challenging. The other challenging, I did another vinyl recently. I can't really mention either. It should be out later this year, which is based on a popular cartoon. And just getting the likeness correct was, that's always something that's tough, especially when, you only have so many resources. Sometimes you don't get a lot of detail, right? Like turnarounds and that kind of thing,
Yeah.
references.
Especially
So
if you're
you have to
dealing
make
with
up a
like
lot.
2D like animated
Yeah,
characters.
yeah.
It gets very tricky, and especially if you're dealing with a character that's like well known or beloved. And
Hmm.
then, so if something's not right, then people look at it and they say, "Wait a second, that doesn't look right." And
Yeah, it
it
just
gets
looks off, and you're not really
yeah,
sure why. Sometimes I
yeah,
noticed this with 2D stuff. Um, the way that they're drawn is very ideal, right? Like it doesn't
right,
really
right,
take into consideration what it would be in 3D, right? Because they
right,
don't have to. They don't like the
right,
eyes are in a certain spot, and
right.
if you actually make the model, you're like, oh, wait, this doesn't make any sense at
Yeah,
all.
it's funny when I was a kid, there were a few times that we'd have these like shows. There were, let's say, like was a 2D show. Like for example, the first one that comes to mind is there was a show, Fairly Odd Parents, and
Okay,
then there's another show called Jimmy Neutron,
right,
and they had this crossover episode. Jimmy Neutron was 3D and Fairly Odd Parents was 2D,
right.
and they had this crossover episode where they like switch places. And like when they had the 2D characters in a 3D world, it was so like unsettling. Like it just
I think
looked
The
so...
Simpsons did that once, and it's like super weird.
yeah.
Yeah, a lot. Also, like I noticed with the video game companies, like sometimes they have concept art in that, but usually they'll send you like a game res model, so it's very blocky, and you have a lot of work to do there too.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's like those kind of starting
Yeah.
points. Like it saves
Yeah.
you some time, but yeah, it's tough to go
It saves
further.
time, but then also in some ways it adds more work.
Yeah, big time.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So yeah, the likeness type stuff is challenging, but if you just go slow and get as much reference as you can, so that you're at least
Yeah.
have something to look at, then
Right.
usually you get there. And then
Right.
the studios are very helpful with pointing out stuff because they're so familiar.
Right.
They're good. They're very good at pointing out like, oh, the hair should be longer here, or blah blah blah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then where do you think like the collectibles industry is heading in the next like 5-10 years, let's say? Like where do you see kind of the trends going in your opinion?
I don't know. I've never really been much on the business side of things.
Mm-hmm.
I know for personally, I just like to make things that I like, and I
Yeah.
figure if I like them, somebody else probably likes them.
Right.
So I should probably not be running a business like selling collectibles. It's probably pretty safe to say. So I don't know. I see a lot of like this digital stuff, like they have companion apps on your phone and that kind of thing. I'm not really sure how I
Like
feel
the
about
AR
that.
and stuff like that.
Yeah, I don't know. I personally doesn't really speak to me. I don't know if that's a generational thing or not.
Uh-huh.
I'm not like a massive social media user and that kind
Yeah.
of thing. So it doesn't not something I'm super interested in. But I don't know. You see more and more of it, so maybe somebody
Yeah.
likes it. Yeah.
It was interesting, like for like the 3 seconds that NFTs were really in.
Yeah.
Like and I was kind of like curious, like, is this kind of the future of like collectibles? Like, is this where and I do think there is a place for that technology. Like, I think it will come back into play. I think
Yeah.
it kind of came too early, like when it did,
Yeah.
But yeah, I do wonder if like, but I don't know. Like, I feel like digital can never really replace having a toy on your shelf. Like it's
not the same
it's not the
experience at
same.
all.
Not at all.
I just
Like,
like
even-
having the thing in my hand. It's
right,
really
like even if you have like a VR environment, and like you have like collectibles that you keep on your VR, bookshelf, whatever, but it's not
Yeah.
the same. It's not the same as like being able to like hold something and see it, and like
Yeah.
it's just, there's a certain joy that you get from
I feel like part of it is like when I walk into my office, I have a wall of shelves with like all my collectibles on there, and I can appreciate them every time I walk in the room. It's like
Yeah.
a passive thing, right? Because they're just always there. But
right.
I don't know how. Maybe I'm missing something, but with the digital stuff, I feel like it's a more of an active thing where I have to open an app and go look at something.
Right. That's a
Whether
good
just
point.
being an experience that's always around me, right? So,
Right.
I don't know. Maybe things will change. Maybe I'm just too old to figure this stuff out. But
Yeah.
who knows? Yeah.
What kind of things do you collect?
I was really into He-Man when I was a kid, so that was
nice.
one of my main things. And I'm really into these old D&D figures. So LGN Toys, I don't think they're still around. They made a line of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons figures. They were sort of like maybe a little bit bigger than a Star Wars figure,
Uh-huh.
but in the general kind of range. and they're hard to find. But I had them as a kid, and then who knows what happened to them. And I,
Yeah.
you know, there was one of the characters in D&D is Tiamat, which is like the god of all the dragons or whatever.
Uh-huh.
And I had that as a kid, and I loved it. It was so amazing. So my wife managed to find one for me.
Oh, nice.
For Christmas several years ago. So when I got that, I started, hunting them down a little bit, and I have, a few of them. I have even one carded one, which is pretty cool.
That's really cool.
And then NECA started making like big versions of them recently, so I have a couple of those too. But
nice.
The fantasy stuff is really like my bread and butter.
Yeah. You've always been into the fantasy. That's kind of
fantasy's my thing. Yeah, like I love Star Wars too. I have a friend who's like in a crazy level Star Wars collector. Like he has carded like mint original.
Oh wow.
Characters and all that. Like he's crazy.
Wow.
And I had a lot of Star Wars figure stuff as a kid too, so I like that stuff. But fantasy really was my jam. Yeah.
You grew up, you say, like on D&D. That was like
D&D, and Lord of the Rings, and like all that stuff. Yeah.
That stuff is. It's funny because like you do have people who are into both, like Lord of the Rings and Star Wars. It kind of like I find people kind of divide into one or two camps. Like either you're fantasy or sci-fi. It's hard to like really be into both,
Yeah, I would definitely lean on the fantasy side, and I think I grew up at a great time when D&D was new.
That must have been amazing.
Right. Yeah, it was. I experienced the whole typical like nerd, like you're a nerd, you play D&D, like not like it is now where everybody plays D&D. It's not a weird thing anymore, right?
Yeah.
We were literally sitting like on our friends' floors in their bedroom playing like and now like. Everyone, it's great. I love it so much. I'm so happy that it's a big thing and that it's sort of normalized, I guess. It doesn't have that weird stigma.
Right.
But yeah, I grew up at a time when it was, becoming what it is now. So that was really fun to see. Same with Warhammer too, because, it kind of came on a bit later, more of like a 90s kind of thing, right?
Right.
Early 90s and late 80s. So yeah, it was, good time to be born, I guess, if you're really into that stuff. And maybe that's because of the time is why.
It's cool that you kind of got to grow up with it. That's really cool experience.
Yeah,
like
it was.
That's awesome. Have you always been collecting the Warhammer, or not Warhammer, like the miniatures? Like you've always been like collecting and painting them, and
well, where I grew up I grew up about 3 hours away from Toronto in a smaller city, and we didn't really have we had a hobby shop, but didn't really have much stuff in it. So my exposure to miniatures was actually my trips with my family. So my parents are from England. They emigrated here when before I was born, and so we go back to the UK to visit family. And when I went there, it was everywhere. So my thing was to go to the newsagent where they sold all the magazines, and I would buy like War Games Illustrated and Dragon Magazine and White Dwarf, and I would just hoard these things. And that's how I kind of got into it through magazines. And then whenever I would see them out, I would I would buy one, and I'd have like a handful of these miniatures, and I didn't know where they were from or what they were for, but I didn't have easy access to them, so it was a very special thing for me to get those. And because of all the reading and stuff, I just loved it. So and as I got a little bit older, when I was in my early teens, when I started playing D&D, I would go hang out with my friends, and we would have sleepovers and just paint miniatures all weekend, right?
Oh wow. Yeah,
and it wasn't really until I moved to Toronto to go to school. That was in the early mid 90s, and GW was becoming more of a thing, and I had much easier access. Actually, the Games Workshop store in Toronto was like around the corner from my school, so I could go there all the time, and I got easy access to stuff. So it kind of blew up during that time. But yeah, it's just it was like it's an unknown world to me, I guess, for a long time, especially when I was really young. Yeah.
But it seems like it caught your imagination from a young age.
Yeah. I was always into collecting He-Man and stuff, so I guess it's sort of the same thing. I was crazy for He-Man when I was a kid.
I think Sideshow, one of the companies made like these really cool He-Man figures recently.
Yeah.
It's like
I think Sideshow did, and there's another company. Name escapes me at the moment. They were making some incredible busts and stuff.
There's one like Skeletor, like super realistic Skeletor was like life size.
They're like insane.
Yeah,
I wish I had unlunlimited funds to buy those and space too, but yeah. I'll have to sell some more models first.
Yeah, right. Yeah, Yeah. So what's your like what's your relationship with like digital versus traditional? Because obviously you kind of have a foot in both worlds. You know, you're doing your digital sculpting and
Yeah.
I'm assuming digital painting as well, and
Mhm.
then you're doing obviously traditional painting and I assume not
Yeah.
so much traditional sculpting, but
Not really. I kind of wish I was more, or maybe more aware of it when I was younger, because I think it would have been good to learn that stuff. So if
yeah,
I had to do it over again with the benefit of hindsight, and
yeah,
100% I would have done that, but I didn't. So uh, I don't really love drawing either. So I tend to work in digital even when I'm sculpting. Like I like to sketch in ZBrush, like mess around, trying to
yeah,
form my ideas there. I know it's not really. I don't know if it's a popular way to do things, and I think a lot of people will say, you should draw, sketch, and on paper and
hmm
all that kind of stuff, which I totally get. It doesn't really work for me. I guess maybe my brain doesn't work that way.
yeah. I'm the
A
same
part of
way.
Yeah, like I like to see it in 3D and be able to move it around and spin it and
Yeah,
zoom in and out and look at things from different angles. And I find sketching on paper doesn't do that for me. I think honestly, people really have to work in a way that works for them, right? Like I don't really buy into a system for doing anything.
yeah,
So yeah, so I would say digital just it works for my brain, and
yeah.
then that's just the way. But I do wish I have done a little bit of traditional sculpting for miniatures just out of
Uh-huh.
curiosity. But I find the fact that I can change things
Yeah,
easy in digital that works for my workflow, I guess.
yeah, yeah. That
Yeah,
makes sense.
yeah,
That makes sense. So let me ask you, just to kind of give like for people who are listening, what's some advice you'd give to somebody who kind of wants to get into the? And I know you didn't have a traditional kind of
yeah, yeah,
path, but people who want
yeah.
to get into the kind of toy industry and collectibles and miniatures and if they're interested in those things, what do you recommend as kind of the path to take to break into that space?
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's a tough one. It's not an easy space to break into for sure. And there's not that many companies out there, I guess, that even hire people full time, or there's a lot of freelancers and contractors out there. But I think if you're gonna really want to do this kind of thing, then make sure your portfolio's like focused on that type of stuff. Like don't have a portfolio that has like, game models and illustrations. And I'm not really the best example for that because I'm a little bit all over the place.
Yeah. But
But
what makes a strong portfolio for miniatures, let's say?
for miniatures, just honestly making a lot of miniatures and uh showing what you can do, right?
Yeah.
I think it's good to have a lot of concrete examples, not just one or two, and then like two other things, and then two other things.
Right.
Even if they're all 3D models, like show that you show your process too, right? So show that you know how to block things out, like so show early works in progress, show that you understand how models need to be split up for casting. If you can get some of that insight, that's good too. But showing your progress and your work, even if it's not, if it's just a work in progress, that's cool.
Right.
But yeah, I personally think it's best to have a focused portfolio on what
hmm
you're kind of like aiming to achieve. Yeah.
What makes like a strong miniature design?
Oh, that's a good question. I think that every model needs to stand on its own and tell some kind of a story, right? So,
hmm
um, if it's just a guy standing there with a sword over his shoulder, just kind of looking wistfully in the distance, not very exciting, right? So, a lot of these characters are heroic characters or evil. Like, there's something about it that makes it, uh, really,
Exciting.
yeah, exciting about what that character is. So you need to show that in some way. So you
Mm.
got to think about the pose and like where they're looking, and you have to have some kind of sense of like who they are just by looking at it, right? So you got to build in some of that storytelling aspect into it. And if you
How
want
do
to get
you?
into technical, sorry, if you want to get into technical stuff, knowing like how to exaggerate detail and that kind of thing is
Mm.
important. So just to show that you understand, like when you're making miniatures, some things have to be bigger or smaller or whatever to
Right.
read
Right.
at that size. Yeah.
Right. So I was gonna say, like, how do you, if you're dealing with you're saying a hero, a villain, whatever it is, right? But you're dealing with such a small scale. How do you
hmm
kind of tell that story while keeping it on a small scale that reads at at a distance and kind of hits all the checks. It checks all the boxes rather.
I think a lot of it will be in the pose. I think you kind of need to exaggerate things too, right? So there's sometimes a little over the topness, kind of will make it sound that maybe they have a thing. There's a thing in miniature sculpting called the tactical rock, which is usually like a rock on the base and they're like got a foot up on it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like some basing, like that kind of stuff. So, and like the cape is like flowing. Is it windy or like, is this hair blowing in the wind? And, is he summoning a spell? Maybe like his fingers are a little bit more curled than normal. Like there's that, you need to kind of push exaggerate the motion and the emotion and the motion just a little farther than you probably would. Like it might look a little cartoony, but you really need to like push that stuff, I think. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're dealing on a larger scale, like a collectible, you don't have to go as crazy with the...
Once you get into the big collectibles, then I think some of the realism stuff kind of kicks in a bit more, right?
Right.
The anatomy stuff, doing a sideshow level statue, the anatomy is like super important. So I think you need to spend more time because you can't really get away with hiding stuff. Like on a miniature, you just don't necessarily see that as much with most of them, right? And there's a lot of like, you can fake a lot, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But as you go bigger, I think you need to pay way more attention to the smaller details. But I think a lot of it also, like, it's the same. Like you still have to tell a story. Like models that are just standing there aren't very exciting.
Right. You want the pose to tell a story. And
exactly.
For sure. But it's interesting because like action figures, it doesn't necessarily apply in the same way, right? It's in an action figure, you kind of almost want to let it be more neutral so that the person, who's engaging with it can kind of pose it themselves. And
exactly. So with that one too, like we made an action figure for the movie The Iron Claw, where it was a wrestler. So with that one, there's a whole likeness thing, which is one side of it, but we made sure that the articulation would allow you to pose the model in the ways that the wrestler could do, right? So you wanted to make sure he could like do the wrestling poses or whatever those are. And then we had like he had like this special like move with his hand. It was like a claw. So, that was important. So it was even in the kind of like the design of the articulation was important because you need to be able to pose it like you would expect the character to move, right? So there's that kind of stuff too.
I remember like when I was a kid, there's one of my friends. I used to love action figures. I still do, but I always loved action figures. And one of my friends, his brother, had this like insane collection of action figures, like literally just shelves and shelves of like every action figure that existed, pretty much. And I remember to this day, like I still think about it when I'm making things. That when I was a kid, the more articulation an action figure had, the more exciting it was. Like I remember there's this one. He had this one action figure. It was like Spider-Man Hulk. It was like the Hulk wearing the Spider-Man suit essentially. Okay. And I remember like every finger had articulation, but not just like each knuckle had articulation. So you could really it was really super posable. And like I remember there's something about that was just so exciting and so like that was so much more appealing than an action figure where like you could move the arm but you can't move the elbow, like
right. Like the old Star Wars figures is weird, like the way they even sit in the vehicles and stuff like doesn't make sense sometimes, right?
For sure. It's like it's interesting like that articulation for me it really makes such a tremendous difference in terms of how appealing the toy is. You
can spend a lot of time just, getting that perfect pose and telling your own story with the figure, which is like a whole point of a whole big part of the play part of it, I guess.
And there's a whole I guess you call it an industry out there of people who do like action figure photography. I'm sure you've seen that.
Oh yeah, those are cool. I love
really
those.
Cool. Some people are really good at it.
Like
too.
little like explosions and like fog and all like that. Those are awesome.
So also like again, if you have the articulation, you can really pose the characters.
For sure.
It allows for so much more story in your shots than if it's just kind of if they're very stiff. So we have a few more minutes here, but let me just ask. How do you tell when something is finished? How is kind of at what point do you say, okay, this is good, this is finished, because that's kind of a hard thing, for me, like, sometimes you always want to like add more and more and more, when do you kind of say, okay, this is This is where I'm calling it.
Yeah. Well, it's, for some stuff, like when you're doing licensed stuff, it's easy because it's when you've, recreated the thing that you're making, right? So there's kind of like a hard end there. I don't know, for personal projects, it's tough, especially if, like some stuff I do, I'm just literally like, I'm going to make a orc warrior, right?
Yeah.
And you just start adding things and you don't know where you're going sometimes. Like you're just making
Right.
up on the fly. So yeah, I don't know, that I guess at some point you just kind of have to call it.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm ever super like fully satisfied with personal stuff. So I think if you're just wasting time, and I guess you need to have some sort of self-awareness that you're not making any
Right.
progress, and then maybe that's a good time to call it, right? That I don't know. I struggle with that too. So I don't know if there's an easy answer for that one. When you're doing commercial stuff, then there's a lot of approvals and things like that too that you have to go through, so it makes the process a little more cut and dried.
Right.
Yeah. So
and there you also have, you kind of have the feedback of whoever is the license holder saying, all right,
right,
like, do this,
like, oh, this
take
is
away
off,
this.
or exactly.
Yeah. No, when you deal with personal projects, especially if it's your own concept, it gets really really tricky.
It does, because I mean that's I guess one benefit of doing sketching is that you kind of work that out at the beginning.
Right.
I can definitely see why people would be into doing that, but for me, I'd like to sketch as I work. So maybe it makes it a little longer, but I'm okay with it. So yeah.
Just one last question, and then we'll
Sure.
call it. But I'm just out of curiosity. I noticed in your portfolio you have these two pieces. That one of them is like, it looks kind of like a little devil, and then you have like the zombie. What are those? What's the story of those pieces?
Oh, so those were, I guess, like a concept for a platform vinyl. So the idea was that the basic shape, the arms, legs, torso, and head would always be the same.
Yeah.
Like a what do you call them? Like the Dunnies and like those kind of figures. Like they're always basically the same thing, with different deco on them. So I was sort of exploring that idea of coming up with my own version of that. I think I had changed it slightly from those ones. Like I'm always sort of like tweaking it to make it work. But yeah, it was just basically my idea for a concept vinyl. And then they were sort of like, I guess the original ideas, I was going to base them on like fantasy tropes or D&D type character tropes and things like that. So I was sort of going down that path when I was making the original ones. Yeah.
Are you still
I come
working
back
on
to that one. Yeah, sometimes I think about doing some more.
Yeah.
But one day I would like to find a use for them, like in real life, and make them.
How do you mean by like a use?
I don't know, like releasing a figure of my own or using them as like a base for something. Yeah, I don't know. They're there, they're sitting in the background, and I still think about them a lot.
Yeah. And the whole like art toy or designer toy, whatever they call them, that whole space is huge right now. I mean, like,
yeah, it's crazy.
I've kind of been like toying with, no pun intended, with the idea for a while, kind of like trying to do like some sort of like art toy, designer toy line, because like I said, like going back to what I said before, it is something so appealing about if you have like a well designed toy, and it's things that you like, like you're saying, like Dunnies, right? Like there's not necessarily a specific IP or theme that they like all go around, but just like they're cute, and you start and the fact that they are collectible, that in and of itself makes it a reason to buy them. Saying,
right?
Like,
exactly.
You have one, you want two, you want and you want to kind of, and then there the special editions and the this and that and the other. So it's kind of But I think with those types of things, it's more than just making a good design. It's also like being able to build a culture around whatever it is that you're making, which
that's the part I struggle with, like
that's the hard
promotional side of it, and that like social media marketing type thing. That's definitely not my strong suit. So I do struggle with that. But that being said, it's a great time to do those, because I mean, with 3D printing, you have the ability to make anything you need, and there's the materials for casting are easily available.
Right.
It's expensive, but it's
you
doable,
could do it yourself.
for sure.
You could 3D print,
100%.
3D print a mold and make them.
There's so many ways to do it. There's so many guys on YouTube that show how the process of casting and making stuff. Like I forget his name now. There's one guy who's making his own like spin cast vinyls, and
oh wow.
I'm sorry, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but if you search on YouTube, you'll find him pretty quick. And
There was a
I mean,
company.
you can make pretty much anything these days.
Yeah, there was a company just recently that they had a Kickstarter. I think the campaign ended fairly recently, but they had a Kickstarter for a tabletop injection molder. So
Oh, really?
yes, it was really cool. It was like they had a 3D printer and an injection molder. They kind of like go hand in hand. And so I don't remember all the specifics. I'll find the link. I'll send it to you. But basically the idea was that you could make your model, and then I think they even had a technology where they would like turn your model into a mold, and then you print it on the printer, and then you could take it out of the printer, and they had this injection mold that used like used resin and shoot the resin in.
Really?
And so like, the idea is instead of spending especially these are like for bigger pieces, instead of spending 48 hours printing it, you could have it in 15 seconds.
Wow.
It was small. It was like it was, I don't know, maybe like this big, and like tabletop, and it was like maybe $1,000. It wasn't even that crazy expensive.
Not bad. Yeah.
It was a really cool project. That like it was really interesting.
I love gear, so yeah, send me a link to that one. Maybe I'll have to put that down in the basement with my other stuff.
There's that. There were two cool Kickstarters. There's that one. There's another one. A company was doing tabletop SLS printers. Did you see that one?
No.
That was another. It was a Kickstarter where they were making tabletop SLS printers.
Okay.
And the idea was like you basically could buy cartridges of the powder, so it's like easy to like swap and whatever.
Ah, right.
And they had also was a Kickstarter campaign, and they ended up getting bought out by Form Labs. Bought them and like shut down the Kickstarter, and they kind of like, all right, we're gonna do it our way now. So I don't know if it's available anymore. I mean, I'm sure it will come onto the market at some point in the near distant future.
Well, that's cool. Yeah,
like it's definitely an exciting time to be in this industry.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways to make things now that don't really rely on the traditional ways of doing stuff or the expensive way of doing things. Especially if you want to do art toys, you can control how much you're making, right? Like if you just want to do a run of, I don't know, 10 or whatever, right? You could do that if you really wanted to.
Yeah. For sure. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. This was a lot of fun.
Oh, thanks for having me. It was a great convo. Good to hear from you again. Yeah,
absolutely. And we'll hope to have you on again soon.
For sure.
All right, awesome.
Anytime.
Thanks. Oh, no, before we go, where can everyone find you? Social media, and I know you're not on social media.
Yeah,
so
I'm not a big social media guy, but I think the only place I really do put stuff is on Blue Sky. I think it's if you search for Mighty Sprague on Blue Sky, you'll find me on there.
All right, awesome. All right, cool.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you.